I loved two men, brothers, and that love destroyed everything I thought I knew about myself. It's strange, isn't it? How something that feels so right can unravel your entire existence. I'm sitting here now, with a life growing inside me, a life that shouldn't exist. A child created in a moment of passion and escape. Mark knows. Of course, he knows. Mark always finds out, and now I have a choice that isn't a choice at all. He told me I had to end this pregnancy and end Alex, or he'd expose us to the world. Every sordid detail. The affair, the lies, the betrayal. He said he'd ruin Alex, ruin me, and make sure this baby, our baby, was erased from existence. I can still hear his voice, cold and steady, as though he were discussing a business deal, and not the destruction of his own family. You fix this, Lydia, he said, or I will. I didn't recognize myself when I looked in the mirror this morning. My once bright eyes are dull, clouded with guilt and fear. I can't tell where one ends and the other begins. This isn't who I wanted to be. I never meant to fall for Alex, and I certainly never meant to betray Mark. But life has a cruel way of twisting love into something dark, something that devours you from the inside. Now, I'm trapped in a nightmare of my own making, staring down impossible choices. The weight of it all crushes me, this love that was supposed to set me free, the baby that represents both hope and despair, and the man I vowed to love, but can no longer trust. And yet, there's a small, defiant part of me that refuses to let Mark win. A part that clings to the faint hope that I can find a way out of this mess, even if it means risking everything. This is my story. It's not a pretty one. It's raw, messy, and full of mistakes. But it's mine, and if you're willing to listen, I'll tell you how I ended up here, caught between two shadows, fighting for a light that seems impossibly far away. When I first met Mark, it felt like a fairy tale. He swept into my life like a storm, all tailored suits, confidence, and the kind of charm that made you feel like the most important person in the room. He had this way of looking at me, like I was the only thing he'd ever wanted. At the time, I thought that intensity was love. I mistook obsession for devotion. Our romance was fast, electric, the kind you read about in novels. Expensive dinners, surprise getaways, and lavish gifts. He pulled out all the stops, and I fell for it. Or maybe I fell for the idea of him, the man who seemed to have it all together. Wealthy, successful, and effortlessly commanding, Mark was everything I thought I wanted. The wedding was grand, of course. A glittering affair that felt like something out of a dream. I remember walking down the aisle, my heart pounding, thinking I was the luckiest woman alive. But looking back, I realize I ignored the little things. The way he would decide every detail without asking what I wanted. How he'd flash that tight, controlled smile when I disagreed with him. I told myself it was just his way, that he was a man used to being in charge. It wasn't long after the honeymoon that I started to see the cracks in the illusion. Mark's charm had a sharp edge, his love a weight that pressed down on me. He wanted to know where I was at all times, who I was talking to, what I was thinking. At first, I thought it was endearing, he cared so much. But it wasn't care. It was control, wrapped in the guise of concern. Then came Alex. I met him at one of Mark's business dinners. Alex was nothing like his brother. Where Mark was all precision and power, Alex was warmth and ease. He had this boyish grin that made you feel like you'd known him forever. While Mark worked the room, commanding attention with his presence, Alex sat quietly at the edge of the chaos, observing with a twinkle in his eye. When he introduced himself, I was startled by the resemblance, identical in every way, yet so different. His handshake was firm, but not overpowering, and his voice carried a softness that Mark's never did. We talked for hours that night. About art, music, travel, the things Mark never had time for. I should have been more cautious. I should have known that the spark I felt talking to Alex was dangerous, that it was the first thread unraveling everything I thought my life was. But in that moment, I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen, like someone was looking past the perfect image I'd worked so hard to maintain. As the night wore on, I found myself comparing them, Mark's commanding presence versus Alex's quiet confidence. Mark was a storm, but Alex felt like a steady breeze, calm and grounding. I couldn't stop myself from wondering, what would it feel like to be loved by someone like him? I pushed the thought aside, convincing myself it was harmless. But even then, I think I knew. Alex wasn't just Mark's twin. He was my escape, the mirror reflecting everything I was missing in my life. And deep down, I knew that one day, I'd cross a line I couldn't uncross. It started innocently enough. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Family gatherings became the rare moments when I could let my guard down. Mark would be busy charming the room, ensuring his image as the perfect husband and businessman remained untarnished. And there was Alex, always hovering just outside the spotlight, always ready with a quiet smile or a clever remark. We'd talk, at first about nothing of consequence. Shared jokes, harmless stories about childhood, and musings on the little things Mark never seemed to notice. But slowly, our conversations grew deeper, more intimate. He started to ask me questions no one had asked before. "Are you happy, Lydia?" he asked one evening, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Instead, I laughed it off, changing the subject, but his question lingered. Was I happy? Alex had this way of making me feel like I mattered, not as Mark's wife, or the polished woman I presented to the world, but as myself. With him, I didn't have to pretend. He saw through the facade, straight into the cracks I tried so hard to hide. The first time it happened, the moment that changed everything, I hadn't planned it. It was late, after one of those long family dinners where Mark had spent hours holding court, commanding everyone's attention. I stepped outside for some air, needing a break from the suffocating perfection of it all. Alex found me on the patio, staring out at the stars. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," he said, handing me a glass of wine. I laughed, though it sounded hollow. "Maybe I am." He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to, you know. Carry it all alone." It was such a simple thing to say, but it unraveled me. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. Not Mark, not anyone. Before I knew what I was doing, I was pouring my heart out to Alex, about the pressures, the loneliness, the feeling of being trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt so empty within. He listened. Really listened. And when I finally stopped talking, he didn't try to fix me, or tell me what to do. He just reached out and took my hand, his touch warm and steady. That's when it happened. A spark. A forbidden, undeniable spark. I should have pulled away. I should have walked back inside and pretended none of it had happened. But instead, I leaned in, and so did he. The kiss was soft, tentative, as if we both knew we were crossing a line, but couldn't stop ourselves. The guilt hit me almost immediately after. I pulled back, my heart pounding, and stammered something about needing to go. But as I turned to leave, Alex caught my wrist. "Lydia," he said softly, "you deserve to be happy." Those words echoed in my mind for days, weeks. I told myself it was a mistake, that it wouldn't happen again. But it did. Our stolen moments became more frequent, more dangerous. A lingering touch here, a whispered secret there. And then the affair truly began, clandestine meetings, hurried embraces, and nights where I could forget just for a little while, who I was and what I was doing. The thrill was intoxicating, but so was the guilt. I wrestled with it constantly, telling myself that Mark's coldness and control justified my actions. He didn't love me, not the real me, anyway. But Alex did. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. Looking back now, I see how I clung to that belief, how I let it blind me to the destruction I was sowing. But at the time, it felt like I was finally alive, finally free. I didn't realize that freedom would come at such a cost. Secrets are fragile things, aren't they? They live in the shadows, whispering false promises of safety, but eventually, the light finds them. I thought I was careful. I thought I could keep what Alex and I had hidden forever. But secrets have a way of unraveling when you least expect it. It was a quiet evening at home, or so I thought. Mark was in his study, the sound of his heavy footsteps echoing occasionally as he paced. I was curled up on the couch, scrolling through my phone, trying to silence the gnawing guilt that had become a constant companion. And then I heard it. My name. Lydia. I looked up to see Mark standing in the doorway. There was something in his eyes, something sharp and dangerous that sent a shiver down my spine. He was holding my phone in his hand. My heart sank. "What's this?" he asked, his voice calm, too calm. I froze. There on the screen were Alex's messages. I didn't even know Mark had taken my phone. The texts were innocuous enough on their own, fragments of our secret conversations, but the context was damning. I tried to speak, to explain, but the words caught in my throat. "Answer me, Lydia," Mark said, stepping closer. His voice was still steady, but his hand gripped the phone so tightly I thought it might shatter. "It's not what you think," I managed to whisper, though I knew it was a lie. "Oh, it's exactly what I think," he said, his calm facade beginning to crack. His jaw tightened, his eyes blazing with a fury I'd never seen before. "You've been sneaking around with him." "My own brother." I opened my mouth to protest, to deny it, but there was no point. The evidence was right there, and we both knew it. "What's worse," he continued, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper, "is that you're carrying his child. Don't even think about denying it." I did the math. My stomach churned, and I felt the room spin. He knew. About everything. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark stared at me, his expression unreadable, before letting out a bitter laugh. "Do you have any idea what you've done, Lydia? To me? To us?" "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. It was all I could say, though the words felt hollow, meaningless. "Sorry won't fix this," he spat. And then, in a voice so cold it froze me in place, he said, "Here's what you're going to do. You'll abort the child. And you'll make sure Alex never has the chance to ruin another life." I blinked at him, not understanding at first. "What are you saying?" "You know exactly what I'm saying," he replied, his voice eerily calm once again. "You'll end it. All of it. Or I will expose you both. To everyone. Your friends, your family, the press. I'll destroy your reputation, Lydia. You'll have nothing left." The horror of his words sank in, each one a knife twisting deeper into my chest. This wasn't the man I thought I married. This wasn't love. This was cruelty, pure and calculated. "Mark," I pleaded, my voice shaking. "You don't mean that." "Oh, I mean every word," he said, stepping closer until he was towering over me. "Choose, Lydia. The baby and Alex, or your life as you know it." I stared at him, my mind reeling. How had it come to this? How had I become a pawn in this twisted game between two brothers? Mark leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. I suggest you make your decision quickly. Time is running out. And with that, he walked away, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence of our perfect home that was now nothing more than a cage. Fear has a way of creeping in, silent and insidious. It starts as a whisper, a faint unease in the back of your mind, until it becomes an unrelenting roar. That was my life now, a waking nightmare, orchestrated by the man I once called my husband. After our confrontation, Mark's demeanor shifted into something even more terrifying. He didn't shout or rage. Instead, he became cold, calculating, methodical. He began to isolate me, his control tightening like a noose around my neck. He insisted I quit my job, claiming it was for my own good, that I needed rest in my condition. He took my phone, my credit cards, even the keys to my car. "You need to focus on fixing this mess you created," he said, his tone calm, but his eyes full of menace. He monitored everything, where I went, who I spoke to, what I did. Calls to my friends went unanswered, because Mark had intercepted them. Trips to the grocery store were under his watchful eye. Even my conversations with Alex were cut short, either by Mark's sudden presence or his cryptic warnings. "He's not who you think he is, Lydia. Be careful." At first, I thought Alex and I could find a way out together, but Mark had anticipated that too. He began planting seeds of doubt between us, subtle but effective. He would accidentally leave texts from Alex open on his phone, messages twisted to suggest betrayal. "I told him everything, you know," Mark said one evening, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "He's not as loyal as you think." I didn't want to believe him, but the wedge he drove between Alex and me grew deeper. I found myself questioning everything, every word, every action, every memory. Was Alex really on my side? Or was Mark manipulating me into believing otherwise? And then the suspicious events began. One night, I heard footsteps outside our bedroom door, heavy and deliberate. I thought it was Mark, but when I opened the door, the hallway was empty. Another time, I found a shattered vase in the living room, the pieces arranged in a way that felt deliberate, like a warning. The breaking point came when I discovered a journal in Mark's study. It wasn't hidden, not exactly, but it was tucked away just enough to suggest he hadn't expected me to find it. Inside were pages of meticulously recorded entries, about me, about Alex, about things I didn't even realize Mark knew. But it wasn't just about us. The journal hinted at something far darker. There were notes about past relationships, cryptic references to women who had learned their lesson or paid the price. One name appeared over and over, Claire. I didn't know who she was, but the way Mark wrote about her made my skin crawl. She thought she could defy me, one entry read. She learned the hard way. My hands trembled as I read, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about control or revenge. Mark had a history, a pattern of manipulation, and perhaps worse. I felt the walls closing in around me. Every move I made felt monitored, every breath a gamble. Mark's presence was everywhere, suffocating and inescapable. I knew then that this wasn't just about saving my baby or Alex. This was about survival. Mark wasn't going to let me go, not without a fight. And if I didn't act soon, I might not get the chance to fight at all. When you've been living in fear long enough, something shifts. The fear doesn't disappear, it sharpens. It becomes the weapon you use to survive. I was terrified of Mark, but I knew I couldn't let him win. Not this time. I managed to get a message to Alex, carefully worded and disguised as an innocent note about family matters. Mark monitored my every move, so I had to be clever. A cryptic suggestion to meet at an old diner just outside town, a place we'd gone once before during a family gathering, was my only chance. Alex showed up right on time, his face a mix of worry and determination. Lydia, what's going on? He asked, his voice low, his eyes scanning the room for potential threats. I told him everything. Mark's ultimatum, the constant surveillance, the journal I'd found. My voice shook as I described the entries, the veiled threats, and the chilling way Mark seemed to relish control. Alex's jaw tightened, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. He's gone too far, he said, his voice trembling with anger. We have to stop him, Lydia. But we need proof. Something concrete to take to the authorities. I nodded, though the thought of facing Mark head-on made my stomach churn. He's always watching, Alex. I can barely breathe without him noticing. Alex leaned closer, lowering his voice even further. Then we'll outsmart him. You'll have to record him, get him to incriminate himself. And if he has anything more in that journal, we'll use that too. The plan was risky, but it was the only option. I knew Mark wouldn't hesitate to follow through on his threats, and Alex and I were running out of time. The next few days were a blur of calculated defiance. I hid a small recorder in the lining of my purse, always ready to capture Mark's words. It didn't take long. You think you're clever, don't you? Mark sneered one night, his tone dripping with disdain. But I see everything, Lydia. Don't forget that. You know what will happen if you cross me. His threats were chilling, his words laced with malice. I kept my face neutral, my hands steady, even as my heart pounded in my chest. Meanwhile, I started piecing together more of his past. The journal hinted at financial dealings that were, at best, unethical, and at worst, criminal. I found receipts, emails, and notes that suggested Mark had been blackmailing business partners for years. But as Alex and I worked in secret, Mark's paranoia escalated. He started coming home at odd hours, checking the house for signs of betrayal. His temper flared more often, and I could see the cracks in his carefully constructed mask. One night, he slammed a glass against the wall, the shards scattering like tiny daggers across the floor. Do you think I don't know what you're up to? He roared, his eyes wild. I froze, the recorder tucked in my purse capturing every word. I'm not up to anything, I said, keeping my voice calm. Liar, he spat, his face inches from mine. You think you can run to Alex? He can't save you. No one can. My heart raced, but I didn't flinch. What do you want, Mark? I asked, my voice trembling just enough to seem defeated. His lips twisted into a cruel smile. I want you to remember who's in control here. You'll do what I say, Lydia, or you'll lose everything. Everything. As he stormed out, I allowed myself a moment of relief. The recorder had captured everything, his threats, his rage, his confession of control. I called Alex that night, my voice barely a whisper. I have it, I said. I have what we need. But even as I spoke, I knew the hardest part was still to come. Mark wasn't going to let me go without a fight. And the fight was just beginning. Fear had guided my every move for months, but now it was my determination that carried me forward. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my baby, for Alex, for freedom from the shadow Mark had cast over my life. The plan was simple in theory but fraught with danger. Alex and I decided to send Mark's recorded threats and evidence to a few trusted allies, a journalist who had a reputation for exposing corruption, a lawyer known for defending domestic abuse victims, and most importantly, the authorities. It wasn't enough to confront Mark, we had to ensure he couldn't twist the narrative. The night we set the plan in motion, every nerve in my body felt electrified. Alex stayed close, his presence a steadying force as we finalized the details. Once this goes live, we need to be ready for anything, he said, his voice low but firm. I nodded, clutching my purse tightly. Inside was a flash drive containing everything, the recordings, the journal scans, even screenshots of his financial schemes. Evidence that painted a damning picture of the man Mark truly was. We waited until Mark left for an impromptu meeting, likely suspecting nothing. By the time he returned, the wheels were already in motion. I sat in the living room, my pulse racing as Mark walked in, his face a mask of suspicion. "What's this?" he barked, waving his phone. He had seen the first wave of leaks, a carefully timed article from the journalist, complete with damning quotes and documentation. "It's over, Mark," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "You can't hide anymore." His expression shifted, his facade of control cracking as rage bubbled to the surface. "You think you're clever," he snarled, advancing toward me. "You think anyone will believe you over me?" I stood my ground, meeting his gaze. "They already do. The evidence speaks for itself." Just then, the sound of sirens cut through the tense air. Mark's head whipped toward the window, his face a mask of disbelief. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "No, this isn't happening." The authorities arrived swiftly, but Mark wasn't ready to give up. In a desperate bid to salvage his crumbling empire, he lunged toward me, his eyes wild with fury. "You did this," he roared. Alex appeared in the doorway, blocking Mark's path. "Stay away from her," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around us. Mark's rage turned toward Alex, and for a moment, I feared the worst. But the police burst through the door, weapons drawn, ordering Mark to stand down. He resisted, shouting accusations and threats until they subdued him. As they led Mark away, his eyes locked on mine. "This isn't over, Lydia," he hissed. "You'll regret this." I shuddered but refused to look away. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt the weight of his control lift, even if just slightly. In the aftermath, the truth about Mark's double life unraveled quickly. The journal entries, the recordings, and the financial documents painted a damning portrait of a man who had built his empire on lies and manipulation. But it wasn't just his public image that crumbled, it was his hold on me. As Alex and I stood outside the courthouse days later, watching the media swarm around Mark's arrest, I took a deep breath. "It's over," I said, though the words felt surreal. Alex put a hand on my shoulder, his presence grounding me. "You're free now, Lydia." "We both are." But freedom came with its own challenges. The scars Mark left behind wouldn't fade overnight, and the path ahead was uncertain. Yet, for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in so long: hope. Hope for a life where I could protect my child, where I could rebuild the pieces of myself Mark had tried to destroy. And as the cameras captured Mark's final moments of power, I knew one thing for sure: he could no longer control my story. It's funny how life works. Sometimes, it feels like everything you've ever known is shattered in an instant. But what you don't realize in the chaos is that the pieces can be put back together, in time, on your own terms. Alex and I have started over. We've moved away from the city, away from the life Mark built, to a quieter place where we can just breathe. Every day is a small victory. The house is small, but it's ours. There are no locked doors, no hidden cameras, no surveillance. It's a world where I can finally make my own choices, free from the weight of Mark's control. But the scars remain. They're not visible, at least, not in the way people expect, but they're there, deep in my heart. Trust isn't something I give lightly anymore. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear Mark's voice echo in my head, the cruel words, the threats. I've learned to live with that fear, not because I accept it, but because I refuse to let it define me. Every time I look at Alex, I remind myself of how far I've come. How far we've both come. We're building something new, piece by piece. The future is uncertain, but for the first time in years, I have the strength to face it. Together. As I sit here now, speaking to you, I can't help but reflect on the journey. Loving two brothers, so different, yet so similar, tore me apart. But it also freed me from the shadows I didn't even know I was living under. Sometimes, it's only through destruction that we find our true selves. And now, I can finally breathe again. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found yourself moved by the story, please like, comment, and share it with others. Your support means the world. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that explore the complexities of love, betrayal, and redemption. And remember, no matter how dark the shadows may seem, there's always a chance to rebuild and find the light. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next story.